Hey everyone, welcome back to Hitchcock Speaks. This is Dave. And this week we're going to tackle a very important question, which is why cinema isn't like it used to be. We all remember the golden age of cinema, the time when the movies like The Lord of the Rings, The Pirates of the Caribbean, The Matrix, and horror movies like Insidious, Inside from French cinema, and Hills Have Eyes, and even The Conjuring were hitting theaters. Let me give you an example. A movie like The Lord of the Rings had a combined budget of $280 million for all its three parts, and it went to, make over $3 billion. But today, there are movies with budgets close to $300 million that barely leave a mark in our memories. I will name some next in this video. So this comparison shows us that in the past, even with less money, less technology, they delivered so much quality. But today, with these huge budgets and this advanced technology, they cannot create the same magic. And the question is, why? So stay with me. I'll tell you why. Alright, or another question that comes to mind is, why does Gladiator 2, even though it's made by the exact same team, have less narrative depth despite having access to better technology? So much so that many of you probably don't even remember what the story of the second part was about. Almost all of us have figured out that this trend started around 2007, when cinema slowly began changing its course. And in this video, we're going to take a good look at history to see if it's really cinema that has changed so much, or maybe we're not like we used to be either. We're going to find out what's the difference between us and the people who went to cinemas 50 years ago to watch war movies. First of all, there were, incredibly long lines to see these films. I mean, a movie like, for example, The Exorcist, 1973. People would faint in theaters, many would throw up, ambulances were always in a park outside the cinema, and the film stayed in theaters for 2 years. But today, if we watch this film on our computers, not only is it not as scary to us, but it doesn't really offer us anything special. Then we find the answer to this question, we'll understand why Warner Brothers canceled their new Tom Cruise film, and why Christopher Nolan places so much emphasis on IMAX cinema. So everything starts in 2007, when several historical turning points happened simultaneously that changed our lives forever. The year Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, and in the same year Netflix, on its 10th birthday, decided to launch its streaming service. I mean, Netflix was founded in 1997, and until 2007, it only rented DVDs. But in 2007, it decided that with the expansion of the internet, it would let people watch movies on their computers. That is, a new theater was born in the entertainment industry. But we need to go a little bit back. I mean, the interesting thing is that this was the second time cinema was, facing such a threat. Before the 1950s, cinema was at the peak of entertainment. Nothing could replace cinema. It was the biggest picture, the loudest sound people could hear, and it was a very important social event in the first place. The statistics show that before the 1950s to 1960s, people went to the cinema every week. This is while only 30% of people went to church every week. This means, cinema was such a big social event that was twice as attractive as God or the religion, I mean. So, why? Because outside the cinema halls, the media world was, very low quality and very boring. I mean, media was limited to words printed on a paper. Nothing else existed outside of a paper. But in the 1950s, radio waves became a new competitor for cinema. Home television was born as well. Now people could be entertained at home. It's estimated that by the 1970s, television had affected cinema so much that it lost half of its audience. That is, the number of tickets sold was halved compared to before television. At that time, cinema made a very smart move and, saved itself. It realized it was no longer at the peak of entertainment, and it had to convince people to come to the cinemas again. People didn't have the motivation to get up and go anymore. So what did they do? So he changed the filmmaking format a bit. Let me tell you how. Blockbusters were born in response to television. Blockbusters became expensive, action-packed and flashy films. Then cinema changed the dimensions. What does it mean? Let me tell you. Screens became wider. That's why when you download a classic film, there are black bars on the left and right side of the image. Because at that time, cinema screens were square. But now, when you download a film, a modern one, there are black bars at the top and bottom because now screens are wider, and this was in response to television. Cinema created such excitement for people in theaters that people couldn't experience the excitement anywhere else. This way, cinema once again stood at the peak of entertainment, and cinema crushed its competitor, which was radio waves. But now, in 2007, it had to fight two very serious competitors simultaneously. That is, small displays or computers, I could say, that fit in your pockets. They were with us, wherever we went. And on the other hand, the internet, that endless stream of content, was always available at your finger touch. The interesting thing is, what does the internet give us? Everything the internet gives us can be summarized in one word. I could say control. We as viewers have complete control over the content we watch. And we have access to an ocean of recorded images. We can choose when and what content to watch, where to watch it, at home, on the subway, at what speed even. If we feel it's dragging, we can speed up the playback, or we can skip it, or even watch it in pieces. Watch one piece now, watch another piece an hour later. In short, everything is under your control. And if you're wondering how important this is, psychologically, at that time, cinema conducted a very interesting experiment. It found that when they showed the same content to two different groups of people, that is, they showed them a film, the first group was brought to the cinema to watch it, and the second group watched the film on their laptop screens. The first group had no control over the screening. They sat until the film finished, and the second group could do whatever they wanted with the film. And the interesting thing that happened was that 60% of those who watched the film in the cinema said that they lost track of time and got lost in the story of the film. But in contrast, about only 30% of those who were on laptops, just because they had the thought that they had the power to turn off the image whenever they wanted, lost track of time and got lost in the story of the film. That is just the thought that we have control significantly changes the way we consume content. That's why when you sit down to check Instagram, you suddenly lose track of time. This is where you can see cinema's first reaction between 2008 and 2012. The first superhero films and films with very fast editing in the style of Michael Bay entered cinemas to convince people that cinema was still at the peak of excitement. They wanted to give the audience the message that you can still experience the highest level of dopamine on the cinema screen. What cinema did almost worked. It was able to attract a new section of the audience to cinemas again, and they continued this until 2012. That was the year they were sure they had crushed their new competitor too, with when they released The Avengers, a movie that I don't really like. The film sales were so good that cinema, producers realized they could pull people to cinemas with the formula of making sequels or spin-offs, or even creating cinematic universes. Many other companies also started developing their own cinematic universes and, making sequels and franchises for their films. And here, a vicious cycle begins that experts call Ouroboros. This word is the name of a snake that eats its own tail and has existed since ancient Egypt to display an endless cycle. Now, in ancient times, they used it to display the endless cycle of life. For cinema, they used it to show a vicious cycle. What does that mean? Let me tell you. It means that when people have, no motivation to go to the cinema because they can be, entertained comfortably at home, the possibility of commercial failure of films has gone incredibly high. For example, Drape explained this topic in one of her recent interviews. The interviewer asked why ordinary films that used to be made are no longer made now. explains, took a romantic screenplay to a producer she had worked with before, like for 20 years. The producer told her, if I come to make the film, it will cost $25 million. I have to spend $25 million on marketing to do advertising. That's $50 million so far. Then half of my sales revenue, which is the cinema's share, means I have to sell like $100 million worth of tickets at the box office just to break even. Only from here on am I supposed to make a profit. Now, what's the story of this film that's supposed to sell $100 million? A normal romantic story. This, means that the risk of investing in ordinary films has gone incredibly high. Instead, where was the money going? It was being invested in what? Producers had realized that if they used a familiar name, people would most likely come to the cinema and watch the film. Because of the situation that had arisen, original ideas were completely rejected by producers. Instead, franchise building started to develop. On the other hand, people who wanted to repeat their old memories would come and buy films with familiar names. And this sent a message to producers that if they, made sequels or franchises, their money would definitely come back. As a result, producers were more inclined to throw away, innovation, just make spin-offs and sequels. That is, cinema turned into a, copying machine that was just copying itself. This way, cinema no longer wanted to invest in a bunch of new projects, and it preferred to make a few huge investments in very expensive films that had a high probability of return. And this becomes a vicious cycle. Producers make, repetitive works, and people go to cinema to watch them. The result is these soulless remakes we saw from the world of Jurassic Park, for example, or even, sorry to say that, the Final Destination 6, or even what you did last summer. And if you want to know how bad things have gotten, I could tell that in 1994, out of the 10 highest grossing films, only 2 of them were repeating names. The rest were new works like Forrest Gump and The Lion King. 30 years later, in 2024, out of the 10 highest grossing films, all 10 of them were repetitive works like Things Are So Bad that some of them, like Kung Fu Panda 4, were on cinema screens. That is, cinema had become completely dependent on its past and was, afraid of the future. That is, in just these, 18 years from 2007 to now, 2025, cinema had come up with 2 solutions to remain entertaining. One was that it greatly increased the special effects in films to remain flashy, and it brought superhero films into the mix that I don't really like them. Some of them, maybe the originals like Spider-Man, they're like fantastic, but the rest, yeah. And when it started building franchises to convince people with familiar names to definitely come to the cinema, but the world was changing very rapidly until 2012, a new competitor entered the market. The year algorithms entered our lives, and Instagram released its Android version with its dopamine-inducing algorithm. And on the other hand, the streaming services didn't sit, idle either, saying now that you're pulling people to cinemas like this, we'll start making our own exclusive content as well. And Netflix, for example, as the first streaming system, produced the series House of Cards with its own production. Now cinema had to fight with new competitors. The toughest competitor it had ever faced was algorithms. To be able to compete with algorithms, cinema once again changed its filmmaking format. And this is exactly why modern films have, a different feel compared to old films. What they call in cinema content creation. Content has a series of characteristics. These clips you see on Instagram are momentary. That is, they give you a feeling like laughter, fear, or anything in the moment. And you go to the next clip and experience another feeling again. That is, although the emotions are very intense, they are momentary and without depth. Cinema saw that its competitor was like this. It couldn't accept that it was no longer at the peak of entertainment. So it changed its format. It started content creation. That is exactly the difference between the film Lord of the Rings and the series Lord of the Rings. Or the difference between the 2 Gladiator films. The older version was cinematic, and the second version is kind of content. That is, in the older version, they created a drama. They told the story of a boy who is always in his father's shadow. They always saw him as weak and called him a mama's boy. When this boy realizes that his father doesn't want to make him king and wants to bring someone else in his son's place, this boy shows a reaction that many of us might make. He kills his father and commits a crime. That is, this story creates a deep drama with human roots that we won't forget for the rest of our lives. But the newer version tries to compete with algorithms and high momentary dopamine of Instagram. It focuses the main film on using CGI to show flooded Colosseum. It's clear that the goal of, the story is to bring you momentary excitement. There is no longer, supposed to be any depth. This is where you understand what happens. Someone like Martin Scorsese comes and makes that comment about Marvel cinema. If you followed cinema news, this director once said that Marvel cinema, or superhero cinema in general, is like a theme park. He didn't want to, demean Marvel cinema. In fact, he was making a very professional point. He was saying that these films are momentary entertainment, just like using a toy. But this wasn't the entire impact. I said that two new competitors had entered. One was Algorithm of Instagram. The second was in streaming services that had started making their own exclusive films and series. In 2012, Netflix launched its own filmmaking format, a template that told it, Save the Cot. It was the name. The screenplay writing template has existed since ancient times, about 100 years ago. What does this mean? How, for example, they would say that films must have 3 acts. For example, character introduction should be in the first act, events should happen in the second act, and that final event should be in the third act. But these were guide formats for screenwriters. But Netflix turned this into a law and into a main template. And how did it build this template? With something called market testing. We encountered a new phenomenon that is storytelling based on market testing. What does that mean now? Earning money in streaming is very different from cinema. In cinema, you have to buy a ticket. But in streaming, something called watch time or viewing hours is what matters. The more time you spend on that streaming service, the more money that company makes. For YouTube, this exact same thing is important. It only cares that you spend more time on YouTube. For Netflix, it doesn't matter at all how much of a film you watch, whether you liked it or not. It only matters that you spend more time on that streaming service. So it engineers your experiences. It realizes exactly where audiences show emotional reactions, where they lean back, where they lean forward. Then, based on the behavior of millions of people, they design a template. They determine where in the film there should be a joke, how long they should wait before the joke. Like the film Red Notice, which has everything in it. It has jokes, it has a movie star, it has action scenes, it has suspense, everything that market testing says people like. Is in this film. But instead of focusing on art, it focuses on delivering a product to the market. In such a format, you can never write a film like Seven. In the past, even an action film like Jurassic Park or Titanic would spend a lot of time on character development to create a deep story. What this screenplay writing format has done is called the McDonald'sification, something like this. Of cinema. That is, it's producing a product that's for a global audience and completely optimized for economic visibility. And from 2012 to now, cinema has been, grappling with these two competitors, and we see the result now. Audiences are tired, and the whole, of cinema feels repetitive and tasteless, in my opinion. And the result has been that films like Joker stayed in cinema for 2 years, while before COVID, films stayed in theaters for 90 days. Now, films stay on the cinema screen for only 45 days by begging. Some genres that have gone completely extinct, like romantic comedies or adult dramas, rom-coms, they have been extinct somehow. These have completely gone to television. Cinema no longer produces such films at all. Films like Happy Gilmore used to come to cinemas. Now they're made exclusively for Netflix. Or even Martin Scorsese can no longer get the budget for his films for cinema. He's forced to go to Netflix and make his recent films for streaming services. But now what happens is the answer to this question, which is that for about 2 years now, companies have realized this, and this is exactly the answer to the question, what will happen now? Warner Brothers comes and cancels the new Tom Cruise film for this very reason, because it found, the answer to this question just a few weeks, ago broke cinema history records and released 6 consecutive films that all grossed over $40 million, most of which were original films with new stories and completely normal budgets. What has happened is that, in essence, the answer to the question of what the future looks like is that cinema has realized it's no longer at the peak of stimulating people's emotions. Cinema has lost the peak of entertainment and must come to the terms with this reality, because cinema is part of the media, and media is now an ecosystem. Media has been people's food for centuries in various forms: printing press, radio waves, cinema screens, and each of these is a tool in the media discussion. And in this big ecosystem, cinema is just one tool that in the past allowed people to have experiences they couldn't have anywhere else. That's why cinema had such a deep cultural impact. For example, when the film Jaws was released several times in different parts of the world, a very small shark would be seen a few hundred meters from the shore, and people would get so scared and run away that thousands of people would get injured during the escape. And why? Because the film Jaws in cinemas had given people an experience that traumatized the audience. But now, cinema is no longer the peak of entertainment and must come to terms with this reality. The main media now is algorithms, to be honest, which can have so much emotional stimulation for people that cinema can never engage people's emotions so much again. The emotions that The Exorcist could create are now considered child's play compared to social media. Algorithms have changed this too. Even us, They stimulate our emotions in very short moments. They peak the peak of excitement in those few milliseconds when you want to go from the first post to the next post. And your brain becomes curious about what will happen next. And this feeling of curiosity exists repeatedly every minute, and cinema can never compete with such a thing. That's why cinema no longer has its old feel, because we've changed as well, and our emotions are no longer easily stimulated. And what we experienced between 2010 and 2025 in these 15 years was cinema's denial. Cinema wanted to deny that it was no longer at the peak of entertainment. It kept trying to use new technologies, different formats to take back the peak position. That's why it brought all this trouble upon itself. It's made its films flashy. It did content creation instead of filmmaking. It released repetitive films to the market so it could remain at the peak, and the result was these soulless films we see now. But now, slowly, they're realizing this reality. They're no longer denying this, thanks to God. They have realized that cinema, has found a new position. Now you go to the cinema to escape from the momentary, short, and exhausting experiences you have from algorithms. In the 1970s, people went to the cinema to see the highest quality, kind of adventure they could experience in 2 hours. But in 2025, people go to the cinema to rest a bit from the, kind of energetic media environment. And this means that cinema is not dying, to be honest. Cinema continues its life, but in a different form, and the day it can accept its new form, it can return to its peak days again. Perhaps, I hope so. So it can be said that we can only escape from this predicament we're in when cinema must hand over the peak position to the internet and stand in second place. Of course, these days, the world is changing very rapidly. Even if cinema, adapts itself to this reality, another new computer is going to cast a shadow over cinema in the near future. And that's artificial intelligence, or AI. When the internet came, it caused content creation to come out of the hands of television and radio. Now, anyone can create content at home, like myself, talking to you. Now, in the future, artificial intelligence will make it so that anyone with a simple 4-person team, even one person, at home can make a cinematic film or a series. And you can imagine what profound impact this will have on the entertainment industry. Alright people, that's it for today's video. I hope you found the answer to the question of why cinema is not like it used to be. Thank you again. See you in the next video.